it's time for me to begin the Master and Margarita. I've done a little bit of research on this book, and as I told you in my TBR videos, I've listened to lectures by Marietta Chudakova. She was a prominent researcher and biographer of Mikhail Bulgakov. She knew personally the latest wife of Mikhail Bulgakov, and a lot of information she got from her. She also worked on the restoration of the first version of Master and Margarita. And this is what I want to talk about it in this chapter of this video, is a little bit history of how Bulgakov decided to write the story and how his idea actually was transformed throughout the time. A little disclaimer, I am reading this novel in Russian, in original language, and it might be a different experience for those who's reading it in translation, for example, in English. And so I'm going to talk about the Master and Margarita mainly from the perspective of a person who is very familiar with the Russian history, who lived in Russia, who is from Russia. I'm going to tell you my first-hand experience throughout the whole book. I will be explaining some of the moments, because let's face it, as much as it can be entertaining and fun to read, if we're talking about classical literature, it can be difficult. I think for me, it's going to be an interesting experience, but also I really hope that you will enjoy it, and I really hope maybe it will inspire you to read this book. So yeah, let's begin a little bit with the history of Master and Margarita. (1928) is the year when Bulgakov has first idea to write a novel about devil visiting the Soviet Union. So just for you to understand, 1928 is the year when Stalin is already General Secretary of the Communist Party, which, as we know, meant that he was a de facto leader of the Soviet Union. 1920s were also very difficult times for the Russian Orthodox Church. From the beginning of the 1920s, there were a lot of reforms concerning religious institutions. So from that time on, they basically started to be an atheistic state. And you can imagine that Bulgakov had an audacity to write a novel about devil himself visiting Soviet Union, but also having a character named Yeshua, who is, without a doubt, it was a representation of Jesus. And so to write a novel about this religious, let's say, questions and ideas in the atheistic state was a very risky move. And everybody understood at that time. Marietta Chudakova, his biographer, notes that initially this novel from 1928 had two goals. So the first one is actually to continue this tradition that Dostoevsky has started to discuss religious matters in the novels. In Dostoevsky's case, it was Brothers Karamazovs and Demons. And so the second goal for Bulgakov was also to write a satire on the society of that time and to show how this assumingly unreligious people meet the devil in the context of Soviet Union. Bulgakov actually proved himself as a great satire author. Before, in 1925, he wrote The Heart of a Dog, which is a very great novella. If you haven't read it or haven't watched the movie, I would recommend any of it. Any options are right, because the story itself is not just a satire, but it's also an allegory to the Russian Revolution. It is believed so. So yeah, but let's back to Master and Margarita. So he decides to burn the manuscript in 1930s, so after 2 years of work. However, he comes back to the idea to write this novel again in 1932. It is no surprise that there was a turmoil for him personally, but it was also very difficult for writers an artist to act and to work in the Soviet Union. Under the perpetual shortening of freedom of speech and freedom of artistic expression, a lot of artists and writers actually emigrated from the Soviet Union. Bulgakov tried to do that too, however, he didn't manage. And he actually regretted it for a long time that he wasn't brave enough to actually leave Soviet Union and create in peace. So anyways, he comes back to the idea to write this novel, but he alters this idea. He still keeps the devil named Voland in this novel. He visits Soviet Union indeed. However, we got new characters. Arguably, these were the characters that were already in the first version of this novel, but they were transformed and got new names and became basically main characters of Master and Margarita, and now we actually have them on the title. So Master and Margarita. So this new novel was not exclusively about the god, religious, and devil, but it was also about the relationship between the artist, or in this case the master, and government or authority. I think I'll stop at this point, and I'm not going to continue to investigate the historical context, let's say, because I think it's just enough to begin with the novel itself. I want to close this chapter of the video with a little anecdote from Bulgakov's life that I think very ironic, let's say. Or maybe it was actually an inspiration from his life, and I believe that it actually proves that there is a strong connection between the life of Bulgakov and this story of this novel. So there is this phrase that all Russian-speaking people know, and it goes like, manuscripts don't burn. So basically this is the phrase that Voland pronounced in Master and Margarita at some point, and everybody knows that. But I find it ironic that Bulgakov actually burned his manuscript, and when he came back to rewrite the novel in 1932, his wife, his life partner at the time, asked him like, but what you gonna do? You burned all the manuscripts. But he said like, no, I remember everything. And that was indeed one of his talents, let's say, the capability of remembering what he wrote. So I do really think that these words sound even a little bit prophetic, especially knowing the history of how Bulgakov wrote this novel. So yeah, anyways, I'll begin reading it today, and I hope you will enjoy my journey as much as I will. I'm sure I will. So, I finally reached the chapter 13 of the novel, where we meet our main character, the master. He is indeed very much autobiographical. There are a lot of similarities with the life of Bulgakov, including the relationships between him and his lover, the fact that he's working on a novel and his struggles in publishing it. However, I think that now is a perfect moment to learn about one of the theories of how Bulgakov came up with the name of the character. So this theory, again, I learned from Marieta Chudakova, who brings up a biographical fact from Bulgakov's life. So he was a very good friend of Akhmatova, who was one of the most influential poets of that generation. And while Bulgakov was working on the novel, Akhmatova paid him a visit and told him about the telephone conversation she witnessed between Pasternak and Stalin. So they were talking about Mandelstam, another Soviet poet, who at that time was arrested and sent to exile. Stalin wanted to fish out information on Mandelstam from Pasternak, But Pasternak was reluctant to tell anything. So finally Stalin asked him, but is he a master? Is he a master? And that was a very peculiar word, which was not in the vocabulary of the artistic circle of that time. It was a tradition since the 18th century to call each other, like writers call each other the poet, but not the artist, not the creator, not the writer, and especially not a master. So basically, Bulgakov got this word from Stalin's vocabulary. And this theory is that by using the word from Stalin's vocabulary, Bulgakov was trying to bring the attention of Stalin to the novel and hence to the problems of underestimation and misunderstanding of the creators in Soviet Union. It can be indeed a working theory because at the moment when Bulgakov learns about this conversation between Pasternak and Stalin, he still didn't have a definite name of the character. And in the first drafts, he was actually narrated from the first person, so the master was actually telling a story. But in the notes, he marked both characters as Faust and Margarita, which was the obvious reference to one of his favorite plays, Faust by Goethe. To name the character after the word from Stalin's mouth is, of course, Bulgakov's own artistic or maybe even political decision. I personally share the opinion of Chudakova that Bulgakov, together with other writers such as Pasternak, they kind of mysticized him and made him more important than he was, quote unquote. It is as if he was brave enough to criticize the status quo, but still had this unsuppressed fear and awe towards Stalin's figure. But yeah, we're working with what we have, and I'll continue to read this novel. So far, I'm really enjoying it. It's so much fun, especially the descriptions of what Voland and the cat are doing. Let's continue. Okay. So, second part of the novel finally introduces us to Margarita after her master disappeared one night. We can, of course, read it in the context of a novel. We know what happened to Master. We know Margarita is confused by his sudden disappearance. That is all quite logical. But if we recall when exactly this novel was written, we immediately realize how the novel is a clear reflection of the real life at that time. So 1930s and especially 1937 were the years of so-called Great Terror or Great Purge. It was a time when people could be taken away or imprisoned or even executed overnight with no trial whatsoever, sometimes based solely on the testimonies of the informants. In this sense, Margarita's reactions when she meets one of the Satan's assistants and when he calls her by her name without introduction, her first reaction is this, and I actually found this English version of Master and Margarita, so I can share it with you. If you say so, Margarita Nikolaevna. Margarita was astounded. Do you know me? But I don't know you, said Margarita dryly. How could you know me? But I've been sent to you regarding a certain small matter. Margarita turned pale and recoiled. You should have said that right away, she began, instead of spouting the devil knows what about a severed head. Have you come to arrest me? Not at all, exclaimed the redhead. What is this? As soon as you start talking, they think you're going to arrest them. I simply have some business to discuss with you. So her first assumption is that he is here to arrest her. But what's interesting is that the response she gets, what is this? As soon as you start talking, they think you're going to arrest them. So Margarita's reaction is very common. Everybody's first idea is that this out-of-this-world creature is here to arrest them. And only then her second assumption is actually that he's got some sort of indecent offer, which is also quite logical in this setting. In general, this novel refers quite often to the Great Terror. If you will, we might call the whole novel an allegory of the Great Terror, where Voland is Stalin who acts through his assistants. But if we accept this interpretation, we should then accept the fact that Margarita, out of necessity, because of her unconditional love to Master, starts to serve Voland. So I'm really curious what exactly will happen further down the line in the novel, because so far it is quite intriguing. And no matter how we interpret Margarita, I love seeing such female character. I love her transformation. I love the power she gains. She's not presented as a typical victim of the circumstances, such as Emma Bovary or Anna Karenina. But again, I haven't finished this book, so I can't finalize my impression completely. But yeah, so far so good. Okay, just a quick update. I'm actually more than half of a book through. I only have 5 chapters left. So I actually took a little break and I quickly listened to an audiobook of another novella by Bulgakov, which is called The Heart of a Dog. And first of all, it's a brilliant novella, and if you haven't read it, if you haven't seen the movie, you should do that. I had an audio version of the book, so for me it was very easy just to jump right into it, and that's what I did. And actually the reason why I wanted to take that break is that before I finish the Master and Margarita, I just wanted to compare other works of Bulgakov with this novel. I just really want to see maybe some features that in his writing that are very peculiar to him. And since I decided to introduce myself to the works of Bulgakov, I thought that maybe this little comparison might be fun. And it is, because one of the things that I think is very special and dear to Bulgakov is the description of food. I might assume that he's actually a big foodie because he writes about food and the preparation of dishes with such tenderness that your mouth starts watering and you actually start wanting to eat something or something that the characters eat. But what's also I noticed is that sometimes food appears in the description in very crucial moments, or sometimes food might actually contribute to the description of the characters. So for example, in The Heart of a Dog, the whole novella begins with the dog describing some of the foods that he would love to eat. This tells a lot about this particular character, of course. And in The Master and Margarita, whenever the characters, any characters, eat food, something happens, something crucial or something sudden. So all the characters almost always are caught in the process of eating. Their joy of food interrupted. And that is, I think, a very interesting detail that I noticed. So yeah. Anyways, back to The Master and Margarita, and I think I'm going to finish it very, very soon. So here we are. Yesterday night I finished reading The Master and Margarita, and also in between I managed to squeeze the little novella from Bulgakov, The Heart of a Dog, which I recommend to everybody. I think this is the time in the video when I'm going to spoil some parts of a book. It's unavoidable. So if you don't want to spoil your reading experience, if you really don't know what's going on in the book, so please just stop here, go read the book. It's a really nice experience. And even if you don't know the history of Soviet Union at that time, no problem, you will enjoy it as it is. It is a very independent novel. You can read it as a love story in the hell of a situation, but I would love to discuss this novel in the light of the historical context, and this is where I have to spoil a little bit, just for my words to make sense. So in this story, we're following Satan named Voland, who's visiting Soviet Union and who's interacting with Soviet people. Eventually, we're meeting our main characters, Master, who's telling his story, how he ended up in the mental asylum. And then a bit later, we meet Margarita in a state of grief and devastation because her lover Master has disappeared one day and never came back, never let her know what's going on. The love story coincides with the visit of Voland, who, with his assistance, basically turns upside down the whole Moscow with his flamboyant performances and his appearance and sudden disappearances. Margarita, by some sheer luck, is chosen to be a queen of the Satan's Ball, and she's invited to participate in it. Margarita also decides that this is her chance and opportunity to ask Satan a favor in return of her participation in this ball. Of course, her true will is Master to be free or to be with her. And this is what Satan easily gets done. So they're back to their normal happy life, but it actually seems that they don't find the peace. Bulgakov decides to solve their conundrum by actually killing them or sending them back to Satan, let's say. So Satan in its turn sent an assistant to their apartment, and this assistant gives them poison. So both characters are dying in their body, but they're not dead, so to say, for the novel. They continue to live as these paranormal creatures, maybe ghosts or witches, whatever you call it. I find it's such a nice solution because in real life, this is what you pay if you deal with the Satan. Again, Bulgakov doesn't tell you what is right and wrong. He is just suggesting that we would think about it and put ourselves in that situation. This is what I really appreciate. He's not moralistic. He's not judging anybody. He's just telling you, yes, you may do that, but you have to pay for that. And that message, I think, is very, very important. It's a great novel. I can't say it's my favorite, but maybe I should just, sleep with that and think about it more. But I really enjoyed it, and I do believe that it is one of the most important novels of the 20th century. It's a must read for everybody, and I do encourage people to read it more consciously, so it's not just an interpretation that is, let's say, that lies on the surface. It is also important for us to understand the context when this novel is written, and I do encourage people to learn more about that, about this side of the novel and the Bulgakov's lives. Another thing that I want to just briefly mention is that Bulgakov was writing this novel at the end of his life, and unfortunately he didn't manage to finish the editing of, let's say, roughly second part of the novel. So he worked really hard on the first part, but then unfortunately didn't have enough time to complete the editing of the second part. That's why the second part, it is maybe not that precise and polished as the first part of the novel, so that's why I think for a lot of people the second part seems a little bit off. Again, the explanation lies in the biography of the author, but just don't mind it. I think it is still good enough, well done enough for us to understand and to get a sense of what was going on at that time, in the 30s in the Soviet Union. So I think that's it on the Master and Margarita. This is all I Can't say at this point of my life, just right after the reading this novel. Maybe I'll collect some thoughts and share it with you in the later videos, but anyways. So yeah, I would recommend you reading it, and if you will in the nearest future, please let me know what you think about it. And also if you have already read it, so please also share with me your thoughts. Maybe I inspired you to reread it and see it from another perspective. So yeah, all of it goes down in the comment section, and I'll see you very, very soon in my next video. Goodbye.